Welcome back to the Similar series. In today's episode, we are going to be creating the pet boost system. Now, similar to the last episode, you guys are going to want to go down below in the description to the link to this free Patreon post where you can download all of the model assets that we use in our game because I just added a brand new model to this. The model that I added to this is actually a table with some potions on it, and that's what we're going to use to basically sell the pet boost to the player. So once you have that downloaded, let's go ahead and insert that model from file. And now that we've imported it into our game, we can see it right here, and we can see it inside of our Explorer called Pet Boosts. What we're going to do is go ahead and move this all the way over to one of our islands. Cool. And now that we have it over here, I'm going to go ahead and rotate it a little bit. And then I'm going to reposition it, adjust its orientation a tiny bit. And I think that's looking pretty good. Next, what I'm going to do is actually throw this inside of the spawn world. So let's go ahead and do that. Then we can go ahead, copy and paste it or duplicate it, however you feel like doing that. And then we're going to paste one inside of the Atlantis world as well. So let's go ahead and move it over to here. And then I'm going to go ahead and rotate this once again and reposition it, which I think that looks pretty good, just like that. Now, it really doesn't matter what folders you put this inside of, but I'm trying to stay organized, so I put one of these in both the folders, and I put one of these models on both the islands as well. Now, really, the only important thing that we need to know about this model is that inside of the model, we have a part called Hitbox, which is simply a small transparent part, which basically wraps around the outside of the entire model, and we're going to be using this in the way that whenever a player touches this table or goes close to it, the GUI will begin to be displayed to them. So like I said, mainly the only important part inside of this actual model is the hitbox right here, and as usual, we did set the primary part of this model to that hitbox part as well. Awesome. So now that we have that model imported and placed inside of our world, let's go ahead and start off by creating the GUI. So inside of the starter GUI, I'm actually going to go ahead and duplicate the settings screen GUI, and then we're going to make that enabled, and we'll rename it as well. Of course, we're going to rename it to be called Pet Boosts. Then let's go inside of the GUI and we have this frame. Now, for the size of it, I definitely want it to be a little bit larger, so I'm going to go ahead and play around with that for a minute. And the size that we ended up with is about 0.33 on the X scale and 0.475 on the Y scale. As usual, let's go ahead and make sure that we do have this centered, which we do almost have it centered, but now that's perfect. And then the next thing that we're going to do is adjust its background color as well. And we want to make it a lighter blue, so we're going to go with that. Then we'll go inside of the frame. And inside of here, we have the title text label. Let's go ahead and adjust the text of this to say Pet Boosts. Then inside of here, we have the container scrolling frame and a template inside of there as well. Let's go ahead and make the template visible so that we can actually see it. Now, with this template, we actually want to make the background transparency 0 so that we can actually see it. And then we're going to set the background color to a darkish blue. Now, before we make any more changes to the actual template, let's go ahead and modify the UI grid layout a little bit. For the cell size on the X, we're going to go with 0.95. And on the Y scale, we're going to go with about 0.375. Now, that might not look too good, but let's go ahead and duplicate this a couple of times and see how it looks. The primary thing that we're looking for here is that we want to be able to display almost 3 entire templates on the screen at a single time, which is exactly what we're doing here. So with that being said, we can tell that the sizing and the padding is good. Next, what I'm going to do is adjust the horizontal alignment and set that to center. And I think that looks a lot better. Then let's go to the scrolling frame container and we're going to modify the scroll bar image color. And we're actually going to set that to a white. Now we can go back to our template and finally start making our changes here. First things first, we're going to go ahead and delete the UI list layout inside of the template. And now we have the setting text label as well as the toggle image button. I'm actually going to go ahead and just move this image button over for now because we're not going to use it right this second, but we can go ahead and start using the setting text label. And we're going to start off by first renaming this to be called title. Then for the text of this, we're going to say something like max level potion. And then let's go ahead and adjust the font and make it bold. Now that we've done that, let's go ahead and just move this to the side for now, because we want to go ahead and create an image label inside of here. We're going to go ahead and rename this image label to be called icon. And for our image, we're just going to go ahead and use this trophy icon as sort of a placeholder image for right now. As usual, I like to make my scale type set to fit so that the image doesn't stretch and become really distorted. And now let's go ahead and set the size to scale, and then we'll go ahead and resize it. So the size that we ended up with is about 0.135 on the X scale and 0.8 on the Y scale. Let's then reposition this a little bit to the left. And then let's go ahead and center this vertically. So 0.5 on the anchor point Y and 0.5 on the position's Y scale as well. Cool. So now we have our icon set up. Let's go ahead and also throw in a UI corner inside of here. And for the corner radius, we're going to go with 0.1 just to make it a little round. So now that we have the icon set up, we can go back to the title. And now we want to go ahead and resize as well as reposition it. So for the position, this is what we went with. You can see right there inside of our properties. And my goal with the position was to basically make the text label start towards the top of our icon image label. And you can also see the size here as well. So 0.5 on the X and 0.273 on the Y scale. Next, what we're going to do is go ahead and duplicate the title text label, and then we're going to rename this to be called description. Then what we're going to do is bring this down a little bit, and then we're going to go ahead and set the text. So for this, I'm going to say increase the level of all equipped pets to their max. Now, the text doesn't exactly matter right here. What more so matters is the size and the position. So we're going to go ahead and resize and reposition it a little bit. And so now the size that we went with is 0.724 on the X and 0.17 on the Y. And for the position, of course, we centered it vertically. And then for the X scale, we set that to 0.16. Along with that, we're actually going to adjust the font style and make this not bold. And now I think that description is looking pretty good. Now, the last thing that we have to do inside of the template is actually modify our toggle button, and we want to make this into a buy button. So we're going to go ahead and rename it from toggle to buy. Of course, for the background color, we're going to go with a bright green. And then let's go ahead and start resizing it a tiny bit and repositioning it a little bit as well. Cool. So this is what we went with for the position. And then this is what we went with for the size. Now, inside of the buy button, we already have a UI corner, but we want to go ahead and add a text label inside of here as well. So let's go ahead and duplicate the title text label, put that inside of the buy button. Then we'll set the text to this to say something like 999 Robux. Let's, of course, go ahead and resize this. So for the size on both the X and the Y, we're going to go with 0.85. And then we, of course, want to center this. So let's go with 0.5 on both the X and the Y there as well. Along with that, we want to make sure that the text X alignment is actually set to center. And then we're going to adjust the stroke transparency a little bit and make that about 0.5. And now with that being said, our buy button's looking pretty good. And I think our template is looking pretty good overall as well. So let's go ahead and duplicate the template a couple of times and see how this all looks. And I think all of this looks pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and delete all of the extra templates except for one. And now with that being said, I think we're done with creating this GUI. So let's go ahead and set the visibility of the template frame to false. And then we'll also set the enable property of the GUI itself to false as well so that we no longer see it. And now with that all being said, we can hop right into scripting this. Actually, there's one more thing that we needed to do before we begin scripting, and that is to create the developer products. So in order to start creating these developer products, we're going to go to our creator dashboard and then go to the developer products section. Then we'll go ahead and click on create a developer product. And for the name of our first boost, we're going to name this pet boost : and then the actual name of our boost, which is going to be clicks 6 enchant. Now, if you're confused by this specific boost at all, what this specific boost is actually going to do is it's basically going to guarantee the player one of our best enchantments in our game at its max level. Now, of course, in our game, clicks isn't exactly the best enchantment, but this is just an example and you can replace it with any of your specific enchantments in your game as well. Also, I'd recommend that you follow our naming scheme to a T all the way until the end of the episode, just so that you can see exactly how we're doing everything. And then once you fully understand the system and everything that goes along with it, of course, you can make your own changes at the end once you fully understand everything. Along with that, we're going to go ahead and set the description. So we're going to say enchant all equipped pets with clicks 6. Then for the price in Robux, I'm just going to say 9, and then we're going to click on create developer product. Cool, and now we've created one of them. Let's go ahead and create the next one. The next one is going to be called Pet Boost Max Level. For the description, we're going to say increase the level of all equipped pets to their max. And then for the price of it, I'm just going to set that to 11. We'll then create our third boost, which is going to be called Shiny. And for the description, we're going to say all pets you hatch for 30 seconds will be shiny. Timer begins after your first hatch. And for the price in Robux, we're going to just say 111. Then we're going to create one final developer product. And this last one is going to be called Rainbow. And the description for this one is going to say all pets you hatch for 30 seconds will be rainbow. Timer begins after your first hatch. And for the price of this, we're going to say 1111 just to make sure that all the prices are different so that we can tell that our GUI is being updated and everything else like that. And as usual, we are going to need the IDs of each one of these developer products. So what I'd recommend doing is clicking the 3 dots here, clicking copy asset ID, and then opening up Notepad or something where you can just store all 4 of these IDs somewhere that you can easily look back at, because we're going to be using these at least in our config module as soon as we create that. And now that we've created those developer products, we can begin scripting this. So in order to begin scripting this, we're going to start off by creating the pet boost config. So let's go inside of the replicated storage, inside of the configs folder, and we're going to go ahead and create a brand new module script. Of course, we'll rename this module script to be called pet boosts, and then we'll rename the variable inside of here as well. Now inside of here, the first thing that we're going to want to do is actually get the marketplace service. So let's go ahead and create a variable for that. Then after that, I'm going to actually go ahead and create a type, and we're going to be using the keyword export so that other scripts which require this module script can also use this type inside of there as well. Now the name of this type is actually going to be called pet boost, and this is going to be a string union. So our first pet boost is going to be called clicks 6 enchant. Then our second one is going to be called max level. Our third one is going to be called shiny, and our fourth one is going to be called rainbow. Cool. Now that we've created those types, let's go ahead and start off by creating our config variable, which is just going to be the primary table which holds all the information about each of our individual boosts. And we're actually going to start off by creating this as a local variable. So we're going to say local config equals, and then we're going to set that equal to a table. Now this table is going to be an array. So the first thing that we're going to do is make another table inside of here. And the only property that we're actually going to put inside of this table is going to be called ID. And of course, that ID refers to the developer product ID that I told you guys to make a list of right after we created all those developer products. So I'm going to go ahead and paste my first ID into here. Then after that table, we're going to go ahead and add a comma here. And then I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this 3 times. Then what we're going to do is simply replace that old ID with our other 3 IDs that we noted down as well. So now that we've added all these IDs to our config table, what we're going to do is go ahead and create a function. This function is going to be called generateConfig, and the logic that we're going to do here is pretty similar to things that we've done in the past, such as what we've done for our Game Passes episode, where we actually generate the Game Pass config as well. So the first thing that we want to do inside of here is we want to loop through everything inside of our config table. So we're going to say for index, comma, product info in config do. Then we'll go ahead and create a new variable, which is going to be called new info, and we're going to use the marketplace service. And more specifically, we'll use the get product info function from the marketplace service. Then we want to pass through the product ID. So we're going to say product info.id. And for the info type, we need to use an enum, so enum.infotype, and the info that we want to get is for a developer product. Now, if we do get some information about that developer product, what we want to do is we now actually want to update our config table. So we're going to say config, then we're going to index that with the actual index, and now we're going to go ahead and update that table. Now, inside of this table, we already have the ID property, but since we're changing that table to a brand new table, we also need to include the ID inside of here as well. So we're going to say ID equals, and then we'll say productinfo.id. Then we're going to add a name property, and then we can get the name from the new info. So we're going to say new info.name. Then we're going to go ahead and add the description, which we can get again from the new info. So we're going to say new info.description. Then we're going to go ahead and add the price. Again, get this from the new info, but this property is called price in Robux. And then finally, we're going to go ahead and get the image property, which again is from new info, but this property is specifically called icon image asset ID. And make sure that you spell all of those things correctly. Now, we're going to make one minor change here, and that's actually to our name property. If we look at our pet boost type, we can see all of the different pet boosts that we have right here. So we have click 6 enchant, max level, shiny, and rainbow. But if we remember how we actually named the developer products, their names all begin with pet boost : So what we're going to do is we're actually going to use G sub on new info.name because we want to replace pet boost : with just a blank space. So now the name of each of these boosts is going to be exactly as we typed it out up here for this type. So rather than the name being pet boost : click 6 enchant, it'll actually just be click 6 enchant. Cool, and now that we've created that function, let's go ahead and call it. So generate config directly below it. And now this will generate the config as soon as our game starts up and this module is required. Now, to make this a little bit easier to understand, I'm going to go ahead and create a custom type for our config. So we're going to say type boost equals, and then we're going to set that equal to a table. And now we're going to add all the properties to here. So we're going to say ID, which is a number. We'll then say name, which is actually of our pet boost type. Then we'll have a description, which is going to be a string. Then we'll have the price, which is going to be a number. And finally, we're going to have an image, which is going to be a string as well. And now that we've created this type, let's go ahead and actually use it. So we're going to set the type of our config variable to a table. And now since this table is an array, the keys are going to be numbers, while the values are going to be of our boost type. Now, all of our code inside of this table might get underlined in red, and that's because this table does not actually meet this specific type. And now that makes complete sense because the only property that these tables actually have is the ID property and not all of these other properties which we say they have. But the reason that we're setting the type here and like this is because as we're scripting and actually using this config, we want our auto-completion suggestions to actually be smart and relevant to what we're working with. So since we know that whenever we're actually working with the config, we will be able to access the ID, the name, the description, the price, and the image. That's why we're going to set the type right here. Now, of course, our script cannot actually realize that this table is going to be updated by this function, and then it will meet that specific type because it'll have all those properties. So that's why this is underlined in red, and that's why we're doing it this specific way. Now that we've set the type of our config variable, what we then want to do is make this variable accessible to all the other scripts which require this module. So we're going to say petboost.config, and then we're going to set that equal to our config local variable. Now, with that being said, we're going to go ahead and create one more function. This function is going to be called getBoostInfo, and it's just going to accept a product ID, which is going to be a number. And now what we want to do first is loop through the entire config. So we're going to say for underscore product info in config do. And now if the product info.id equals the product ID, then what we're going to do is go ahead and return that specific product info. And now that we've created this function, let's also set the return type of this function to the boost type that we created earlier. Now this end statement right here might be underlined in red, and that's because our function does not guarantee that we return something of the boost type. So a way to fix this is we could return nil, but then we would also have to adjust the type here as well. And realistically, this is probably the best and safest way to go about it. But I don't know. In my opinion, that's pretty unnecessary because now every single time we use this function in other scripts, we're going to want to include an if statement after that. And for the most part, if we're using this all correctly, we really don't ever have to do that. So if you want to do it this way, you can. But what I'm going to do is just leave it like this and simply just have this end statement underlined in red because it really doesn't bother me that much. And we're not ever probably going to come back to here anyway. So I'm perfectly fine with that. Now, there's actually one small mistake that we made inside of here that we need to fix real quick. Let's go back to the gsum method. What we're doing is replacing the string petBoost : What we actually forgot to do is replace the space after this as well. Because if we don't replace the space after it, then all the strings will actually have a blank space at the beginning that we might actually not really catch. So let's make sure that we add the space to here as well, because once we add the space to there, then all of our names actually will come out like Click 6 Enchant, Max Level, Shiny, and Rainbow, instead of having, say, a blank space in the beginning of it. And now that we've done that, we are actually done with the pet boost config. Now the next thing that we're going to do is actually adjust the player's data just a tiny bit. So we're going to go inside of the replicated storage, inside of the player data folder, and open up the template module script. We'll then go all the way down to our template variable, and towards the very bottom here, we're going to add a brand new property, which is going to be called pet boosts, and that's simply going to be set to a blank table. And that's all that we're going to do inside of here, so let's go ahead and close that. And now let's begin by implementing this on the server side. So we're going to go inside of the server script service, and we're actually going to go ahead and open up the shop server script. Inside of here, we're going to want to go ahead and create a variable for the pet boost config. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, once we have that variable created, we're going to want to come down to the purchase product function right here. Inside of here, we can see that once we create our product type variable, we create a few if statements, and then we perform some actions based on what the product type actually is. Below our product type variable, I'm going to create a brand new variable, which is going to be called isPetBoost, and we're going to use a function that we created earlier inside of the pet boost config. So we're going to say petBoostConfig.getBoostInfo, and then we're simply going to go ahead and pass through the product ID. Now, if anything is actually returned to this, so if isPetBoost, then what we're going to do is return something. And what we plan on returning is actually a function, which we're going to use to reward the player with the boost. Now, we're not going to create that function inside of here. Instead, we're actually going to create that function inside of the pets module script inside of the server script service. So inside of our Explorer, inside of the server script service, we're going to go down to the pets module script. Inside of here, once again, we're going to go ahead and create a variable for the pet boost config. So now that we have the variable created, we're also going to add a function to the pets module script as well. So we're going to say function pets dot, and the function that we're going to create is going to be called reward boost. And this is going to accept a player, which of course is a player, their profile, and then also the product ID, which is going to be a number. Now inside of here, we're going to create a variable called boost info. And just like how we did in our shop script, we want to get the info about a specific boost from its product ID. So we're going to say petBoostConfig.getBoostInfo, and then we're going to pass through the product ID. Now, of course, if we don't get the info, then what are we going to do? Well, we're actually going to return enum.productPurchaseDecision.notProcessedYet. And the reason that we have to return this is because, remember, we're going to be returning this specific function call inside of our shop server script. Now, if the boost is actually valid, then what we want to do is get all the players' currently equipped pets. So we're going to create a variable called equippedPets, and that's going to be equal to petsconfig.getEquippedPets, and then we're just going to pass through the player's profile.data. Then we'll create a variable for the actual boost itself. So we'll say boostinfo.name, and now we're going to create an if statement because we want to do a couple of different things based on what the boost actually is. So first, if the boost equals clicks 6 enchant, then what we actually want to do is give all the players' currently equipped pets the clicks enchantment at the level 6. So we're going to create a variable inside of here called enchantment, which is going to be clicks. Then we'll create a variable inside of here, which is going to be called level, and we'll set that to 6. And now what we want to do is loop through all the pets that the player currently has equipped. So we'll say for_pet in equipped pets do, and then we'll go ahead and actually update the pet. So we'll say profile.data.pets, and we'll index that with the specific pet UUID. And now once we actually have the pet, we want to go inside of there and update the enchantment table. Inside of the enchantment table, for the enchantment, we want to set that to our enchantment. And then for the level of the enchantment, we of course want to set that to the level. And now that we've applied that enchantment to the pet, the next thing that we want to do is fire off our enchant pet remote event to replicate this to the client. So we're going to say remotes.enchant pet fire client. We'll pass through the player. We'll pass through the pet.uuid, we'll pass through the specific enchantment, and then we'll also pass through the level as well. And that's actually all that we have to do inside of this specific code block in order to apply that enchantment to all the players' equipped pets. Still though, inside of this if statement, we're going to go ahead and say else if, and this time if the boost equals max level, then we want to do something different. Although we're still going to loop through the players' equipped pets, so we could actually literally just copy and paste this for loop right there, but we'll delete all of the code inside. Now the first thing we want to do inside of this for loop is actually get the pet's max level. And in order to do that, we have to use the pet's config. So we'll say petsconfig.getConfig, then we'll pass through the pet instance, and then once we get its config, we can get its max level because it's a property of the config. And now that we have its max level, all we have to do is actually update that pet's data and then go ahead and replicate that to the client. So in order to do this, we're going to say profile.data.pets, then index that with the pet.uuid, then we'll update the level property of it, and we're going to set that equal to the max level. Now that we've updated that pet's data, let's go ahead and replicate that to the client. So we'll say remotes.update pet level fire client, we'll pass through the player, we'll pass through the pet's UUID, and then we'll also pass through the max level as well because that's the new level that the pet has become. Cool. And now we've scripted both of those enchantments. Still inside of this if statement, the next thing that we're going to do is actually say else. So now if the player purchases one of our other boosts, which would either be shiny or rainbow, what we're going to do is we're actually going to update the player's data that we added earlier. So we're going to say profile.data data.petBoosts, and then we're going to index that table with the specific boost, and we're simply going to set that equal to true. So let's say, for instance, that the player purchased the shiny boost. We're going to go inside of their pet boost table, and then inside of that table, we're going to add shiny, and that's going to be equal to true for right now. Now, finally, outside of the if statement, once this function is done running, the last thing that we need to do is actually return a product purchase decision. So we're going to say return.productPurchaseDecision.purchase granted. And now that's all that we actually have to do inside of this function. And now that we finished creating this function, we're going to go back to our shop server script. And inside of here where we started off our return statement, we're going to say pets manager.reward boost. We'll pass through the player, we'll pass through their profile, and then we'll pass through the product ID. And now that we've called that function inside of here, we're actually done with this script as well, so we can close out of both of those. Now, the last thing that we need to do to implement this on the server side is actually update our eggs server script. So inside of here, all the way towards the top of our script, we're going to go ahead and create a brand new function, which is going to be called handlePetBoost. And this is going to accept the player's profile and their pet, which is actually going to be a pet instance. Now, before we actually create this function, let's actually look at where we're going to call this function at. And we're actually going to call this function right before we call the givePet function. So we're going to say pet instance equals, and then we'll set that equal to the handlePetBoost function, passing through the player's profile and their pet instance. So when we use this actual function, this function is going to return a pet instance, which is going to be the updated pet instance, and then this function is going to proceed as normal. So now let's go back to the handlePetBoost function, and inside of here, we're going to create a table for the player's currently active boosts. And we need to do that because the player could have both of the boosts active at the same time. Although that wouldn't make too much sense, it is definitely possible, so we do want to script around that. Now remember, when we're saying handlePetBoost, we're actually only referring to two specific boosts, which is either going to be shiny or rainbow. The other two boosts are not going to be handled inside of this function at all, so don't get confused by them. Remember how in our other script, if the player purchases one of those boosts, we actually add that to the player's data and then set the value to true? Well, now inside of this script, once the player actually begins hatching, that's when we're going to start that 30-second timer. So the first thing that we want to do is loop through that table that we just added to the player's data. So we're going to say for boost, end time in profile.data.petBoosts do. Now, of course, our end time variable right here could either be a number or it would be a boolean, which would be set to true. But we're still going to call this end time because most of the time when we're dealing with this, it should actually be end time rather than being true. So again, the first thing that we want to do is we actually want to check if the end time value is equal to true, because if it is, then we know that we now have to activate their 30-second timer for when this boost will actually start and end. So if end time equals true, then what we're going to do is actually set end time equal to os.time, which would be the current time, and then we're going to add 30 seconds to that. So now that we've updated that variable, we also have to update the player's data as well. So we're going to say profile.data.petBoost, then we're going to index that with the specific boost, and then we're going to set that equal to the end time. So now that 30 seconds in advance will be stored inside of the player's data, and we're done with that if statement. And now the next thing that we need to do is actually check if the player's boost has expired. But first, we're actually going to do the opposite. So if the current time is less than the time when it'll expire, then we know that the player still has the boost active. So we're actually going to insert that boost into our active boost table. So we're going to say active boost, and then we're going to insert the boost into that table. Then inside of this if statement, we're going to say else, because if the OS time is greater than or equal to the end time, then we know that the player's boost has expired and we should remove that. So if the player's boost is expired, then we're going to say profile.data.petBoosts, index that with the specific boost, and then we're going to set that equal to nil because the player's boost has expired. And now that's all that we actually have to do inside of this for loop. After this for loop is when we're going to start making our modifications to the player's pet instance. But before we do that, we actually want to check if the player has any active boosts. So we're going to say if hashtag active boosts equals 0, then we're simply going to return the pet instance because the player has no active boosts. After that, since we now know that the player does have some active boosts, we want to loop through all of the boosts that the player does have active. So we're going to say for_boost in active boost do. Now we'll start off with the shiny boost. So we're going to say if boost equals shiny. And now we want to update some properties of the pet instance. And for a shiny pet, we actually only have to update one specific property, which is the shiny property. So we're going to say pet.shiny equals true. Then we'll say else if boost equals rainbow. Then, and now we need to update a couple of more properties. So we'll go ahead and paste the shiny property. We do need to set the shiny property. In addition to that, we also want to set the golden property. And then finally, we want to set the rainbow property to true as well, just like that. So now we're actually applying the effects of those boosts to the pet right there. And finally, after that for loop, once we've applied all the effects from the boosts, the final thing that we're going to do is actually return that pet instance back to wherever this function was called. And remember, we call this inside of the hatch function right after we actually create the pet instance and then right before we actually give that to the player. So right before we give the pet to the player, we'll update the pet based on if the player has any pet boosts active, and then the hatch function will resume like normal. And now with that being said, that's actually all that we had to do inside of this script, and we're actually entirely done with implementing this on the server side. Now with that being said, let's go ahead and start implementing this on the client side. So in order to do that, we're going to go inside of the star player, inside of the star player scripts, inside of the GUI folder. Then I'm going to go ahead and duplicate the pet index local script and rename this to be called pet boosts. We'll then open this up and we'll start off by updating the variables inside of here. So we're going to need the marketplace service, the replicated storage, the player service, the workspace service. We'll also need the pet boost config. Then we'll create a variable for the player GUI, the specific GUI, which is called pet boosts. Inside of that GUI, we have the frame. Inside of that frame, we have the container, and then we also have the exit button inside of that frame as well. Now, in order to start scripting the GUI, we're going to go ahead and create a brand new function, which is going to be called generate boosts. Inside of this function, we want to loop through all the boosts inside of the boost config. So we're going to say _boost info in pet boost config.config do. Then we'll create a variable called clone, which of course is going to be equal to container.template, and then we're going to clone that. We then want to set the parent of this clone equal to the container, and we want to set the visibility of it equal to true. Next, what we're going to do is set the name of this clone equal to the boost info.name. Then we want to update the text of the title text label inside of here as well. So we're going to say clone.title.text equals boostinfo.name. We'll then update the description. So we'll say clone.description.text equals boostinfo.description. We'll then update the image label inside of here, which is actually called icon. So we'll say clone.icon.image equals, and now we need to include the RBX asset ID : / inside of here before we actually include the boostinfo.image string, just like that. And then one of the last things that we want to do is update the price. So we're going to say clone.by.title.text equals, and now we're going to display the boostinfo.price beside the word Robux. And now that we've updated it all visually, we also have to listen for when the buy button is clicked. So we're going to say clone.by.mousebutton one click, connect, we'll create an anonymous function. And inside of this function, all we actually want to do is prompt the player to purchase the specific developer product whenever they click on it. So we're going to say marketplace service, prompt product purchase, we'll pass through the player, and we'll pass through the boostinfo.id as well. So we create our clone, then we update it visually, and then we listen for whenever the player clicks the buy button, and we prompt them to purchase the Game Pass. So now that's all set up perfectly. Now that we've created that function, all we have to do is go ahead and call it right below where we created it. So once a player joins our game, this script will load up and generate all the boosts that need to be stored inside of our GUI to display to the player. In addition to that, we need to actually script that brand new model that we just added to our game. Whenever a player touches that, we want to display this GUI to that player. So we're going to go ahead and create a function, which is going to be called setupParts. Inside of this function, we want to loop through all the descendants in the workspace and look for those brand new parts that we just added. So we're going to say _descendant in workspace, get descendants, do. Now, if the descendant is a model and the descendant's name is pet boosts, then we know that we got the model that we're looking for. And now that we know that we've got the model that we're looking for, we want to listen for their primary part to be touched. So we're going to say descendant.primaryPart.touched, connect, create an anonymous function inside of here. And now we only want to do something when this part is touched by our specific client. And now a simple way to actually do this is by saying if other part.parent equals player.character then. And if this is true, then what we're going to do is we're going to say GUI.enabled equals true to display the GUI to the player. And now that we've done that, all we have to do is call that function right below where we created it. Cool. Now there's one final thing that we need to do. It's very simple though. All we have to do is script the exit button. So we're going to say exit.mousebutton one click, connect, create an anonymous function. And then whenever this button is clicked, we're going to say GUI.enabled equals false to no longer show the player the GUI. And with all that being said, we are officially done with scripting this entire system. So let's hop into our game and test this out. Cool. So once we get into our game, let's go ahead and go over to our pet boost table. And once we touch the table, we can actually see that the GUI is displayed to us. Of course, we don't have any images here because we didn't actually upload any images for the developer products, but we can see that the title, the description, and the price has been updated for each of these as well. So our first one, max level, increase the level of all equipped pets to their max. Then for our buy button, it says 11 Robux, and we can see all of our other ones as well. So that's all looking good. Now let's take a look at the pets that we currently have equipped. We can see all of these different ones right here, and none of them actually have any enchantments. But let's go ahead and open up this GUI again, and we'll actually buy the Clicks 6 enchant. Now, once we buy that, hopefully that'll apply the enchantment to all of our equipped pets, and we see when we hover over these pets now, all of them display Click 6 because they all now have that enchantment. So that's working perfectly. Now, I've actually deleted all the pets from our inventory in order to make it easier for us to test the next boost. So we'll go back to the boost table, and this time we'll actually buy the rainbow boost. So let's go ahead and purchase that. And then once we purchase that, let's go over to our egg right here, and let's go ahead and start hatching. So we'll hatch one pet. Let's look in our inventory, and we can see that this dog is actually rainbow. Now, maybe that's just by luck. Let's go ahead and hatch 6 more. And now once we hatch 6 more, we can see that all of them turn out to be rainbow as well. So let's go ahead and keep hatching. And all of these are all coming out to rainbow, so that is working perfectly. I'm going to go ahead and delete all of them. We'll just get a couple of more. And then once it's been 30 seconds since we started. That will expire, and then once we hatch, we should no longer be getting rainbows every single time. And now we can see that the boost has actually expired, and we're no longer hatching rainbow pets unless we get really, really lucky. Now, of course, you might be thinking, well, should we add a notification for this to display to the player when their boost has expired? You certainly can. I felt like it was fine for me to leave this open-ended, and if you want to add your own notification to that, you certainly should be able to, considering we just recently implemented the notification system into our game, so you should have an idea of how to do this yourself. Anyways, with all that being said, we are officially done with implementing the pet boost system into our game. As always, if you did enjoy, smash the like button. Also check out the Patreon post in the description to get access to all the game files that we made during this episode. And with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next episode.